Ever wanted to learn how to use Substance Painter but didn't know how to incorporate it into your Cinema 4D workflow? Don't worry, we got you covered. Here are a couple of tips to get you started. Hey there, I'm Miranda. I'm a 3D artist from Denver, Colorado, and a teaching assistant for Cinema 4D Basecamp. I've been working 3D professionally for 6 years and have had the opportunity to work with clients such as the Denver Broncos, the Mill, and Beeple. What is Substance Painter? Think of Substance Painter as a Photoshop for 3D models. It's an extremely versatile tool that automatically takes care of the technical parts of converting your textures to different pieces of software, allowing you to focus on what you do best, and that is being creative. So here's what we're going to cover in this tutorial: how to prepare a model in Cinema 4D, once imported into Substance, how to bake your model, how to combine materials by using masks and generators, then how to export textures, and finally, the proper method for building your Cinema 4D shader. It does require your models to be UV unwrapped. If you're unfamiliar with what UV unwrapping is, check out this tutorial from EJ on how to use the newest UV tools in S22. But to make things easier, we've provided a 3D model already UV unwrapped so you can follow along. Let's hop into Cinema 4D so we can prepare the model. Okay, so once you download the project file, you should be seeing these two items. One is the School of Motion logo, and the other one is the School of Motion pyramids as a 3D file. As you can see, I already have it open inside of Cinema 4D. So let's go ahead and prepare this guy for Substance. So I don't have any materials on this one, and that's because I want to show you guys something that's very important when preparing your models. So let's go ahead and create a new material. Let's go ahead and name it. So I'm going to call it Som Pyramid. And let's go ahead and drop it onto our object. And so what happens inside of Substance is that it looks at the materials. So if we have a material for each one of these triangles or trapezoids like this guy, you're going to have about 6 texture sets. And that means it's going to create a whole lot of different textures that you have to wrangle. But if you have one texture on the whole thing, basically you only have to create one set of textures. It'll make a lot more sense once we get inside a Substance. Just take my word on this one, it's going to save you a ton of time. Okay, so before we send this guy over to Substance Painter, we want to do this thing called vertex colors. And basically what it does is that we grab the points and then we assign colors to them. And by doing that, you can then extract that information inside of Substance. So select your object and go here to polygons, and using UF, you can now switch over to your fill selection tool. And so now you can see I can choose each one of these guys individually. So let's go ahead and select this guy, and while holding down Shift, you can switch over to the points. And here we can drop in a vertex color. So let's hit Shift C to pull up your commander and type in vertex. And so this guy right here with all the little dots, let's go ahead and double click that. And so now you should be seeing this, which is complete black. And here is where the School of Motion logo is going to become very handy. So let's go ahead and open this guy. And I'm going to color pick all of these different colors. So let's go ahead and move it off to the side. And so this pyramid is green. So I'm going to go ahead and color pick it and select Apply Selected. And so now our object is green. And let's go ahead and do that for the rest of them. Make sure you switch over to your fill selection. Make sure you switch over to your polygon. Now select that while holding down Shift, hit the point selection. And now let's double click on the vertex color. Now select the blue, and let's go ahead and apply selected. So let's go ahead and do that for the rest of these. So now that all of these objects are colored, you can see that we don't have to do that within the material. It's all being stored inside of these vertex colors. It's going to make a lot more sense once we get inside of Substance. So let's go ahead and export this guy out. Go down here to export and select FBX. So down here, make sure that this guy right here that says vertex colors is activated, and we should be good to go. All right, let's go ahead and hit OK. Go ahead and select where you want to save it. Cool. All right, I'm going to hop in to Substance. I'll see you there. Okay, so once you have your FBX exported, just go ahead and pull this guy up, I'm going to move it to my second screen. So here is what you should see as soon as you start up Substance. I'm going to go ahead and close this guy down, and I'm going to go ahead and drag in my model inside of here. And it'll give me all these different options. Make sure that auto unwrap is deactivated. That model has already been UV unwrapped, so you're good to go. On your template, make sure that is set to metallic roughness, algorithmic. And let's go ahead and hit OK. Cool. So as you can see, our model is loaded, and we can see our UV map over here. And so if you want to test it to make sure that it works, all you have to do is start painting on it. And you can see that it gets projected on correctly. You can also paint over here, but it's a little easier, more intuitive to do it this way. Cool. All right. So now let's go ahead and go into our texture set settings. And let's go down here to where it says Bake Mesh Maps. And this is where people usually will bring in their high poly mesh, so like a ZBrush model, and then bake it down into the normals. But because we're not doing that, and this is a pretty simple object, we're actually going to use this for a different reason. And that is to get like the curvature, the position. We don't need thickness, but we're going to use those vertex colors here in the ID. So make sure you click on this guy. And over here, instead of material color, let's make sure we put this to vertex color. So now let's go back to our common. And here you can increase the resolution. I'm going to bring it up to 2K. And let's go ahead and hit Bake Select the Textures. Cool, everything is baked. Let's go ahead and check out what we got. So down here, it puts all your mesh maps. And as you can see, we have this one called an ID and has all the colors. So you can actually see them individually over here in your project tab. And you can see that the colors that we painted inside of Cinema 4D are coming over. So something I like to do with this particular map is to create a fill layer, which is the little bucket right here. And it'll give you these options. So base color, all that good stuff. I'm just going to drop this guy inside of base color. And as you can see, it brings all those colors in and basically colors it all for us without having to do any sort of painting, which is great. So something that I want to talk about really quickly is that you can actually deactivate these channels and only use one or the other. I only want to use the color information because everything else, all the physical properties, are going to be driven by materials. So if you hold on Alt and click, it'll deactivate the rest of them and just keep color. Cool. All right, so let's go ahead and start dropping in some materials. So let's go over here to materials. I have a ton of materials already loaded. And yeah, these are all things that I've collected over the years. So what I'm going to do is click here on this little funnel and come down here to algorithmic. And these ones are the ones that are preloaded with Substance Painter. So if this is the first time you've ever opened it, these are the materials that you're going to have. So I'm going to use two of these materials, and I'm going to show you how to mix the two. So I want to do like a basic sort of plastic color underneath, covered with a metallic surface. Let's go ahead and drop this paint material. As you can see, it's very shiny and it looks pretty, but it is completely replacing the colors. So similar to what we did earlier, where we deactivated all the color channels, we can actually do that for these materials. So here in color, I can just kill that and it'll essentially take the color from the fill layer, but then it'll apply the properties of the roughness, the metal on top of it. Cool. So now let's go ahead and do that with this aluminum. Let's drop it on top. Cool. So it gives you this interesting looking shape. Let's go ahead and scale it down. Something like that looks good. Gives you nice little like surface imperfections, like nice bumpiness. But again, it's replacing the colors. So what we can do is actually kill the color again. And so now we have a combination of the layer underneath as well as the physical properties of the aluminum. Cool. So what I want to do is isolate these metallic bits to the edges. And since we already baked our material, we can actually derive the edge information really easily. And the way you do that is by using masks. And here is where you select your masks. And here, let's go ahead and make a black mask. And it basically makes it completely invisible. So if you paint inside of the mask, similar to how you do in Photoshop, you can actually start revealing the material. So let's go ahead and while clicking on our mask, let's click on this little wand icon and add a generator. And here you have all these generators that you can select from. I'm going to use this one called Metal Edge Wear. And as you can see, it starts to isolate everything to the edges, but it also gives you a nice sort of like chipping effect where it looks like it's damaged. So here you get these settings. So you have a wear level. So if you increase it, it gives you a nice sort of scratchiness. Over here you have your contrast, so it makes it sharper or not as sharp. And what's really great about Substance is that you can see this all in real time. And here in the grunge mount, you can increase it, lower it. I would recommend just kind of dialing in some rough settings for right now, because what we're going to do is combine a couple of these generators. So here in our mask again, let's go ahead and add another generator. And this guy, let's do something like dirt. And if you notice, it completely replaces the original one, the Metal Edge Wear. And that's because there are transfer modes on these layers, similar to how they are in Photoshop. So let's go ahead and dial this guy in before we combine the two. So here in our dirt level, we can kind of expand it a little bit. Let's do a little bit of contrast so it's a little bit more isolated into these little corners. Yeah. And here in the grunge mount, you can increase it or lower it. I'm going to lower it, but also kind of give it a little bit of that. And here, let's go ahead and change our transfer mode from normal to linear dodge, so it'll combine the two. And so you can see that they are now kind of playing together and creating a nice little effect. But that's not it. We can also do one more thing, which I think is going to be really helpful, and that's adding a paint layer. So clicking on the wand again and come down here to paint, you can actually start painting. So if there's a couple of places where maybe you want to add a little bit more detail or remove detail, you can actually, by using the X key, you can actually switch between adding and subtracting. So just go in here and see if there's some areas that you would rather have, have more detail than others. So here I feel like it's a little empty, so I'm just going to go ahead and start make my make my brush a little bit bigger and just kind of paint some of these little edges in, give it a nice little effect. Cool. All right. So yeah, something like that, and you can always turn it on and off so you can see what you're doing. Cool. All right. So now we got it nice and messy, but if you notice underneath, this guy is still way too shiny and it's too clean, especially considering that this guy has a lot of texture to it. So let's go ahead and play around with this guy a little bit so we can give it a little bit of roughness. So thankfully inside of Substance, there's this tab here called grunges. And these ones are a lot of different noises, textures that all have different sort of scratches, or you can have stuff like water stains. The one that I really like are these fingerprints, which are, if you just type in fingerprint, you can see that there's these smudges, just like normal little just fingerprints, but you also have like these ones that are smeared across the surface. So what you want to do with these is actually drop it into this roughness channel. And so now when you rotate the light around, which by the way you can do by holding down shift and right clicking and then dragging left and right, you can now see the surface imperfections. And if these feel a little too big for you, you can actually lower it. By scaling down, you can give it a little bit more resolution and it doesn't look as spread out. Cool. And another thing you can do is there's this property down here called metallic. So if you increase it, it actually turns things very metallic. And as you can see that where it's completely white, it'll appear as a reflective surface, which looks nice. But something else that you can do is actually drop in one of these textures in the metallic surface. And so now you have two layers of variation. And so as you play around with this balance, you can see the properties changing. So let's find a good little reflection spot. And then as you increase it, it becomes more metallic. So now you have two layers of roughness. But if you want to add even more roughness and add more variation, there's another thing you could do, which is create another fill layer. This one, you can drop it all the way to the top. And here, doing the same thing we did before, just selecting Alt and clicking on Rough, you can now select another grunge map. So let's go ahead and do something that isn't a fingerprint. Maybe something like a lake could look cool. So let's go ahead and drop that in there. And you can see that it's looking really smeared. Scale it down a little bit so we can get a little bit more resolution out of it. But the problem with that is that it completely replaces the roughness underneath it. So if you notice, they don't combine at all. It's either one or the other. So the way to combine these is by using your transfer modes. So it might be simple enough to just say linear dodge, but it doesn't do anything. And that's because we're set on base color. So what we want to do here is go here, select it, and come down to roughness. So now if you change that to linear dodge, it will combine the two. And as you can see, it's very grungy. And here you can actually then control the opacity. And so if you do this with multiple layers, you can create a very unique and complex layers of roughness. And one of the best things about Substance is that you can do this and it'll keep your models looking standardized. You know, it'll give you a lot of variety, but not only that, you can also paint a lot of this stuff yourself by using some of the brushes. And with that, I think we're looking pretty good. So let's kind of give it a final look-see. I'm not really liking how this looks right now. I think it's very low res. That's because we're at 1K. So let's go ahead and bring this guy up by going to our texture set settings. And over here at 1K, let's go ahead and put this at 4K. Cool. So now we have a lot more resolution and it looks a little bit more realistic. Cool. Okay, so let's go ahead and export these textures and import them into Cinema 4D. Okay, so let's go ahead and export these guys out. Let's go over here to File. Go over here to Export Textures. Here, go ahead and select where you want it to go. Make sure it's set to PBR Metallic Roughness, which is what our settings are set to. And our SOM Pyramid is going to be our only texture set we're going to export. Here you can actually see which materials are going to be exported. And as you can see, there's a few that we're not really going to need, like this emissive one, but it's part of the thing. And to remove it, you would actually have to go in here and do a few things, but that's a whole different thing. I don't really think we need to play around with that too much. We're going to be using Metallic Roughness for ours because that's the one that works best with Cinema 4D. Okay, so go ahead and select where you want it to go and hit export. Okay, once it's exported, go ahead and hit open output directory and it'll pull up where it's saved to. So I'm going to have this off to the side so I can drag them in inside of Cinema 4D. Okay, so using this material that we already created, let's go ahead and let's make this a little bit bigger so we can see what we're doing. So here in Basic, we want to create a few things. We can use color, although we can actually do everything inside of reflectance, but just to make it simple, I'm going to go ahead and keep color. And we're going to activate normal because we're going to need that for our bump map. And we can also use displacement. Okay, so over here in your color, where it says texture, you want to drop in the one that says base color. And so right away, you should see that there's color. Cool. So let's go over here to our reflectance. In here, we have a couple of things, which is this default specular. You can remove it if you want. Okay. So I deleted that. Let's go ahead and add ourselves a new layer, which is going to be this GGX. Okay. So now you have this really shiny surface. And what you want to do down here is inside of our roughness, let's go ahead and troll this guy down. Inside of our texture, we grab our roughness map. Let's drop it inside this texture. So now you should be seeing a little bit of variation on the surface. Cool. Okay, so down here, let's look at reflection strength. Let's troll that guy down. And on this one, we want to use our map that says metallic. Okay, so now, as you can see, there's areas where it's shiny and other parts where it's not. Okay, but we have one issue, and that is that if we hit render on this guy, it's just going to give us what we're seeing here, which is just a reflection with some dark spots. So what we want to do is come down here where it says layer color and put the base color inside of our texture. All right, so now we have our color, our reflection strength, our roughness, all working off of our reflectance. We still need to add our normal. So all you have to do is go here to your normal tab and drop in your normal texture inside of texture. Cool. So now, as you can see, when you get close, there's a little bit of surface variation. It's nice. Cool. And the last thing we want to do is here in displacement, we can actually add our height map here to create displacement. All right, so here where it says height, make sure you put this something a little low, something like 1, because if you have it really high, it's going to blow out your model. It's going to distort it in a bunch of different ways. So down here, make sure you activate subpolygon displacement. Basically what it does is that it subdivides your model so that there's a lot more polygons for your texture to displace. Cool. So now we're pretty much good to go. Let's go ahead and put in an environment and some lights. Okay, so now that I have it textured and rendered with some lighting, you can see that our material transferred over really easily. You can see the color, you can see the reflections, you can even see some of the displacement going on. There's like these nice little surface imperfections, and it looks pretty cool, and it rendered really quickly because it's not being procedurally generated inside of the software. And you can also see where I painted some of the textures in. It's a little different from the rest of it. So yeah, when you compare this to your Substance Painter, you can see that they're pretty similar. It actually looks a little nicer inside of Cinema 4D because it does have the added benefit of having all this CPU power, creating a single image. Whereas inside of Substance, it's a little bit more it works a little bit more off of your GPU and uses a real-time game engine. So you don't get as much of the subtle details as you do inside of Cinema, which is great. And that's it. Hope now that you know the basics of importing and exporting in Substance, you take this opportunity to dive into the software and take advantage of these wonderful tools to make your textures that much more interesting. Hit subscribe if you want to learn more about Substance Painter. We have more of these coming your way, and subscribing is the best way to be notified. Thank you so much for watching.